Alright, I'm Melanie Jimenez,
I'm Luca Vareta.
And I'm Jackson Skinner.
and we're doing Frankenstein.
Alright, so Frankenstein is written by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. A little background of this story is that Frankenstein was made through a bet. It was written through a bet. So Shelley's friends and her wanted to, they did a bet on to see which of them could write the best horror story. And so Shelley would go around Europe and would take things around her environment and create Frankenstein. So a little summary of Frankenstein is, so it first starts off with letters from Captain Walton writing to his sister, and he talks about his expeditions and being stuck in this icy place, and it transitions from the last letter, it transitions to the story following Victor, our main character, Victor Frankenstein, creating a horrific monster that would later terrorize his life until his death. And that is how Frankenstein is. So on to our questions. Our first question is if the monster is justified in the things he did in order to take revenge on Frankenstein. So we are first brought up in chapter 4 how Victor creates his monster, and at first he is baffled because of how he created life. He played God, in other words. But then later in chapter 5 it states, quote, "It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils, with an anxiety that almost amounts to agony." So in other words, he is petrified. For one, it does state that he did close up, because when he found out that he created a monster, he saw horror in it and he wanted to run away from it. So later on, he leaves the monster. Victor would leave the monster, and the monster would later feel all lonely, and so monster would later kill Ernest, and later would also take on Elizabeth, I believe. So because he wanted a woman in his life, the monster did. And so I believe that the monster is justified in this story, and I feel like it's a lost soul, because the monster had no deal in being created. In other words, he didn't want to be created, and being left all alone in this world, it left him petrified, alone, scared, and angry that he was created. He didn't want to be created. So
I'd like to chime in on that question. I don't believe that the monster was justified. I don't think he's responsible, though, because as Melanie said, he was brought into this world without choice and left to be alone in misery and pain. But the thing is, the things he did, we learn when he's in his stay in the cabin in the woods, when he reads the novels, he can tell basic right and wrong and know basic human principles of how we are to act, moral and ethics. And because of that, I don't think he's justified in killing Ernest and Elizabeth, as Melanie said. But I do think he's not responsible for the things he did. I believe that would be Victor, because of the situation he put the monster in without any help. He basically said, "Here's this awful situation, now I'm going to let you loose," and ran away from him, as Melanie again said.
So I agree with Melanie that the monster was justified because Victor died in the end of the story, and so basically he got justification off of that because Victor died at the end. And I agree that the monster didn't want to be created. Well, it was Victor's choice to create him, and he was guilty of that.
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go off of what you said, how I feel he is justified, because again, how how you said that how he killed, like he knew the moral and ethics, but then again, we have to remember how, I mean, he was brought up onto this world, and how when Victor died at the last, he also wanted to die in peace. And so I think through his actions throughout the whole novel, I don't think he was justified until the end, where he said, "I want to die in peace," because he was a raging monster. He was all about trying to, destroy Victor's life because of what Victor did to him. And I think what I'm clearing up is how I think how the monster is justified at the end of the story. How he wanted to die in peace and alone, since his creator died. So on to our next question is, how does Frankenstein teach us about between science and morality, and how it clashes each other to make this conflict? So to better explain the question is, how does science and morality work in Frankenstein, and what can it teach us?
Well, I think one thing that this can teach us is that in this modern day of the great technology we have, where countries are starting to clone like animals, to increase like food production and things like that. I think it's important to keep in mind what we believe is right and wrong, not just what we can do, but rather we should do these things. Because even though we have the capability to do things like for example, in Frankenstein, Victor had the capability to create his monster. Should he have done it? Because he brought him into the world ill-prepared to handle him and be able to control him and make sure that no harm came out of it in the end. And as we can see, he was not prepared to handle the monster, and the rest the monster went on a killing spree and ended up driving Victor to insanity, to the point of pursuing him across the globe until he finally dies as an old man. And it just really shows how the big principle, we need to consider what we can do and whether we should do those things before science advances.
So I think that the moral of the story is that we have limits, and we can't go over that limits. And if we do, and we're gonna make something that's beyond us, and it's gonna be this is what basically what happened in Frankenstein. Victor created the monster, and the monster basically killed everyone that Victor loved, and because it was his hobby to create things, and he went beyond the limits of humanity.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. How our morality, or in society, we have this saying called playing God, and what it means is we literally we play as gods. We think of ourselves as gods, and we create things that we shouldn't really be doing. In fact, I believe Frankenstein teaches us that humanity has these limits, just like you said, how we have things where we can do and where we can't do, and creating life is something that we shouldn't do, because we should leave nature to its thing. That's nature's job. Our job is just to play part in it, but not to fully do it as a thing. And Frankenstein and Victor had this hobby of creating things, and in one instance he used electricity and frogs, and he saw the opportunity, so he had the knowledge to create life, and he did create this monster, and later would regret it when the monster terrorized Victor's life, his personal life, killing the ones he loved, and seeing that his creation was the one that destroyed his life. And so we have to remember that our morality and our humanity, our principles, is that we shouldn't go over those borders. We should just be in our limits. We can, with our modern technology, we can do a lot of things, but we have limits, and we should respect those boundaries.
Yeah, going off of what Melanie said about that, it's towards the end of the novel we can see how Victor kind of learns his lesson about, playing God and creating life when the monster finally catches up with him and basically twists his arm into making a female monster for him to have a companion so he won't be alone forever. And while Victor initially agrees during the process, he realizes the damage that his first creation caused that he shouldn't have ever made. And he kind of learns his lesson and stands up to the monster and basically says, no, I'm not going to do this. I've tried playing God once and it ended horrendously. I'm not going to do it again. I've learned my lesson. And that just kind of makes the story feel more whole and complete in my view.
Yeah. Another question, a little small question I have, is the relationship between the brothers and sister described in chapter 2. It's amazing how it kind of, if in some way it foreshadows, because in chapter 2, no, in chapter 1, sorry, Victor, so Elizabeth, the sister of Victor, is brought into their homes, and so here in chapter 1, it says, quote, "We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only." And so it's kind of foreshadowing that till death, that Elizabeth will be his forever, will be his only. And she does die in the end by the hands of his creation. And so it's foreshadowing this relationship between brother and sister, how she would later die, and throughout before the monster's created, we're brought up with instances where death is included, starting with the death of his mother when she dies of scarlet fever. Elizabeth caught it first, but then she was brought to good health, but his mother was dead, and there's a lot of instances which leads up Victor to creating the monster, which is with his all death relating to his family. So it's that kind of it all started. I believe it all started like right when Elizabeth was brought. It was like written in the stars another way.
I just think it's also like that. It's just kind of ironic how, it's Victor's job to take care of his sister throughout the whole novel, but in the end it's him who causes her death unnecessarily.
So our next question is, well, we have two-ish. So what is the importance of Frankenstein's existence? It kind of relates back to Frankenstein and the morality and ethics of humanity. And again, how Frankenstein teaches us that we shouldn't go beyond the boundaries and stuff like that. We have our limits, and we should respect those.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alright, so as human beings, we should understand that we have limits, and we should not go beyond the boundaries, as I said, and we should let it just be it, and you can't just you gotta respect that, and basically
nature is meant to be nature. Man is not meant to meddle with nature,
And so our final question is, what does the story of Frankenstein teach us about about modern practices of science?
Well, this is kind of a reiteration question, but mainly, it draws a line, again, as both Melanie and Luke said, between, what man can do and what man should do. As we know, in the story of Frankenstein, at least, Victor had this immense power and knowledge to be able to create life, which essentially made him a god. And, in the beginning of the play, he doesn't consider the should question. He just says, I can do this, so I will do this, and creates a monster. And the events unfold as we know they did. And towards the end of the play, when he's being forced to make the female counterpart to his original monster, he kind of has that moment of recollection. He's like, should I do this? Is this the right thing to do? And by this time, with the death of his brother, mother, father, and eventually his soon-to-be wife, Elizabeth, he just kind of learns, this is not something I should do. I have the power, but I shouldn't do this until I know I can control it. And he stands up to the monster, kind of, in a way, has a moment of redemption for the things he's done, and kind of realizes the error of his ways.
Yeah, and this story, Frankenstein, was written in 1818. So it suggests, it says that, what I get from it is that humanity has been having these thoughts of creating life on their own since the early times, and and throughout history we've tried to at least recreate life in a way, and Frankenstein teaches us that we really can't do that. We see that this monster terrorizing Victor's life, that it's a result of his creation, and we have these borders. And again, I'm restating of what I'm saying, but Frankenstein tells us that with our modern technology, we still can't do things, and it's important that we do that. We don't do any mishaps until we control it. But even if we can't control, even if we can't control these modern practices in creating life form, I think personally that we shouldn't be able to do that. We shouldn't do that. We really can't.
Yeah, we can see the effects of these principles in the real world today, such as the creation of the atomic bomb. How when Albert Einstein presented the idea to the president at that time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, how he didn't think at the time when America was in World War II, he didn't think, should we, but we can, so let's do this. And so they made the bomb, they dropped it, and because of that action, because they didn't stop and think, should we do this, is this right, it defined more than a century of human history, and now overshadows today's world even, and is still a looming threat at all times. And it just shows how before man creates, it needs to think, should we do this instead of just can we?
Alright, so even though we're technologically advanced, we still have to know that we have limits, and we should not, again, I'm restating it again, but that we have limits, and we should keep away from that, because bad things will happen, people will die, and yeah.
Our modern practices in science, we have the power to destroy or create life, and we have to keep in mind that in using Victor, how the excitement of creating something new can make us feel proud. Our pride grows even more. But once when we see our mistakes, we start to notice that we shouldn't have done this. And so Victor is a prime example of how we can't break the laws of nature. We shouldn't. And going back on chapter 5, how he felt the amount of agony and the dreary night, and how it disturbed him by the wildest dreams, his wildest dreams creating life, and so it disturbed him. And so putting that now into society today in our modern times, that creating life might be good, but is it beneficial? What do we get from it? And we have to keep in mind that, again, we have boundaries, so we can't do that.
Yeah, the story of Frankenstein just overall emphasizes the place that man plays in the world, how we're meant to rule over the earth, but not to be its creator or commander of life. Man has a very distinct place, and if we step out above or below that place, there are always going to be negative, heavy repercussions.
And something that I thought right now, how going back to the Captain Walton, how he's a bystander to all this, to what's happening right now, and at the end, how when he goes back to check on Victor in the room, he sees the monster there, and he's frightened and astonished that this big monster is here, and he's next to Victor's deathbed. And then the monster states how he wants to die, that he wants to die in peace, and takes Victor with him and goes into the snowy night. And so I feel like at that point it's at that point when we find out that we really can't do this. How Captain Walton is kind of like us. How like the spectators, the readers, we're all seeing this from a point of view, and we're seeing the outcome of this problem, of this creation. And so overall, Frankenstein is about how playing God is never our thing, and that we have to respect those. And that's how, and I believe that's what Shelley wanted to create and wanted to tell through her story. So.